Thanks for joining us, and welcome to the Reptile Livingroom, featuring John Taylor of Herphouse Magazine and James Tintle with ColdBlooded Publishing. The Reptile Livingroom is brought to you by HerpHouse Magazine, the premier digital magazine for the reptile hobbyist, and by ColdBlooded Publishing, your exclusive reptile media publishing company. Now, here are John and James in the Reptile Livingroom.
Good evening. Welcome to another broadcast of the Reptile Livingroom. We're the only independently produced and distributed live reptile broadcast available today. Each week we bring you a specific panel of herpetoculture and herpetological respondents to discuss the various aspects of our community and current events impacting and affecting herpetoculture and herpetology. Reptile Livingroom also brings modern-day technology to our community through an interactive platform. Interact with us and our hosts, guests, and other like-minded individuals on the Reptile Livingroom YouTube channel live during the show, which my partner James will explain momentarily. I am your host, John F. Taylor of the Reptile Apartment Group, and would like to introduce my co-host over there, James Tintle of Tremendous Tricolors. Jimmy, how are you tonight, sir?
I am doing pretty good. I am surviving Florida weather.
Well, you know, I think this week has just been hell for everybody. It seems like everyone we talked to has had some event or some type come up in their life that they just didn't really need at the time. I totally blame the supermoon. I think that's what it is.
Something like that, I guess.
Exactly.
I'm not quite sure if I blame supermoon, but...
well, it sounds good. You know.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, man. So who's our sponsorships for tonight?
Oh, I don't know. Do we have to go through the sponsors tonight? I guess we could. Let's start from the bottom of the list this time around.
We should.
Let's go ahead and start with the Tempo from Blue Maestro, your digital thermometer and recording device. Sorry about that. Then we have Dragon's Lair, and they are Canada's supplier. So that's Dragon Lair. Oh, and if you're watching us on Google+, you can see everything on the right-hand side of your screen, and all the links are right there for all our sponsors. Our third sponsor of the night is going to be Digital Aquatics. They actually have the Herp Keeper. So they have some pretty cool modules on there, and you can actually add to the device. So we have Digital Aquatics, and then we have a new sponsor this week, and that's Gans Crickets. So if you have lizards or cricket-eating invertebrates and lizards and reptiles, go to Gans Crickets, tell them Reptile Livingroom sent you, and order your crickets and mealworms from them. And then, of course, we have Reptiles Express. Reptiles Express is your reptile shipping place. Great people over there. Contact Debbie, and once again, let them know that Reptile Livingroom or Reptile Apartment Group sent you. Then we go into some really cool sponsors. We have two great artists, and the first one we're going to cover is Natalie Bieto. She's been working on some awesome stuff. I saw her post up Mantis this week. Really awesome.
Mantis shrimp, yes. We just ordered 2 of those.
Awesome stuff. And then we have
shrimp on the way.
Yep. Then we have Rachel Lynchen of Happy Gecko Sticky Situation, and that's reptilestickers.com. We have Reptile Livingroom actually has some deals in the works with Rachel, so we'll actually be promoting those for our audience here in the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have HerpHouse Magazine, your leading digital, all digital, almost 100% free advertising magazine. So those are our sponsors for the week.
And definitely check out the showcase to the right over there. It brings in all the advertisers, so you guys can just click. Only if you're watching on Google+. Is that correct, Jimmy?
Yep, just on Google+.
Okay, so if you're watching us on Google+, on the right-hand side of the screen over that way, you'll see a nice little showcase of all the sponsors that you can click on all their links directly and take you right to their websites to order all the awesome goodies that they have available. And there's also, in regards to tonight's show, there's the ARAV Find a Vet link. which one of our guests, Dr. Bradley Waffa, was so kind to provide. And this basically gives you absolutely no reason not to take your reptile to a vet because it lists all 50 states with a vet, so you have no excuse not to find a reptile vet near you.
And if you can't find one, contact us. We'll find you one.
We'll find you one. Exactly.
So,
we know lots.
Yeah, contact us on Facebook, post on our Facebook page. We'll find you one. And if we can't find you one locally, we'll actually get you in touch with somebody that is knowledgeable, like Dr. Waffa, Dr. Bruce, or Christina Miller. I mean, our three wonderful guests that join us tonight. So they're always willing to help out, too. So what other kind of news do we have this week there, John? We got anything we want to cover?
Well, we got that new paper that just came out in regards to ball python nidovirus, a candidate for etiological agent for severe respiratory disease in Python regius. It was actually, I don't know if it was actually authored by or if Dr. DeRissi was just involved in the actual work itself. I still haven't read the paper yet. Dr. DeRissi, you might remember from an old Reptile Living Room show in regards to the IBD, or inclusion body disease interviews that we did, in regards to the connection, the viral connection to Ebola and how that got misconstrued with the public media. The way the public media took it was they portrayed it as, oh my God, all boas and pythons now carry Ebola virus. That is not the case. That is not what the paper said. Never even came close to saying that, but it's the public media, so what do you want? I will be reviewing this paper here this week, and I'm hoping to get out an overview of it either tomorrow or Monday of next week. Other news, I don't think I had anything else as far as other news, except for the incredible hatchlings that my partner and mentor and all-around smart guy keeps hatching out. Jimmy, do you have one of those laying around the back there that you want to show off?
I suppose I could. Hold on 1 second.
Oh man, these snakes are just incredible, guys. If you're into colubrids, this is going to blow your mind. These are just some incredible snakes that James has produced out of tremendous tricolors.
Definitely one of the definitely the rarest milk snakes that I have in my collection. That's for sure. But of course they hatch out, so they're a little dull. Let's see if I can get a decent look at it.
Oh.
As they go flying.
Hey, don't lose my snake.
Yeah, right. These are definitely not your friendly little corn snakes either.
No.
Not those guys. And they are wild. So they're only they're F3s from the wild. So they still have that wild instinct as babies. They do not want to stay still.
And what are they, Jimmy? What are these known as?
Well, these are Blanchard's milk snake. So it's Lamprepeltis triangulum blanchardi, and actually they're from the Yucatan Peninsula. So I call them Yucatan milks because the original male was actually collected in Quintana Roo on a chicken ranch, but the female came from the Moscow Zoo and has no actual locale data attached to her. And by the looks of her, she looks like she was integrated with Lamprepeltis triangulum polyzona. So there might be a little bit of polyzona influence into these as well. But the closest thing to Blanchardis that you can actually get in the hobby.
Yeah, now, folks, if you do want to check these out, you can go over to Tremendous Tricolor's Facebook page, and I believe there's some images there as well as on James's personal page, too. And basically, it's got a small bit of stripes on the tail. It's solid red all the way up to the head, and then it's got one yellow band with the black head. It's just an amazing snake. Another one that James has produced that I will own at some point in my life once I make my first million, because I'm going to buy one of each of Jimmy's snakes. And speaking of producing snakes, I guess we can start with the introduction. If you're okay with that, James.
Yeah, actually, we can do it quickly. I mean, we really don't have to go in too much because some of these are returning from our Ask the Vet show that was on a few months ago. So let's introduce Dr. Waffa first, since he's on the right-hand side. Dr. Waffa, welcome to Reptile Living Room.
Hey, thanks for having me back, guys. Really an honor.
Well, it's a pleasure. And Dr. Waffa, you are now in Virginia, is that correct?
That's correct. I'm in Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm practicing in Portsmouth.
Okay, great.
And you can tell I'm new to the area because I'm still calling it Norfolk and not Norfolk.
Oh, boy.
And then we have Dr. Bruce Bogoslavsky from down the Florida area. To my knowledge, at least one of the most popular reptile vets in Central Florida. I think you actually have Central Florida pretty much on lockdown, don't you there, Dr. B?
No. I had it for a while. You know, Dr. Hess was doing most of the birds, and I was doing most of the reptiles.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Diaz, who's board certified in avian, he's got a place. He was working with our specialty group, tried to have an avian exotic specialty for a while. And they actually contacted me before they opened up, and I just told him, you know, I talked to the guy, Frank, and I said, you're not going to make enough money to pay that doctor because people aren't going to pay what your prices are with their reptiles. And, you know, poor guy, he was there for about 6 months, and then he called me up on the phone. He's like, yeah, I'm getting canned. I'm going to have to open up my own place. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. It was the death trap whenever you went into it. So, but Dr. He's got his place. There's a handful of us. There's enough new grads coming out that have a decent background, and there's enough people getting into it. But we have reptiles in our building every day, but I still see the dogs and the cats just as well.
Awesome.
And as a footnote, if you go to the ARAV Find a Vet page, you may or may not see me because they had a new app on it, and all of a sudden on the ARAV Facebook page, everybody was posting, why am I not on the ARAV Find a Vet page? So we all had to re-sign up for the page. So hopefully I'm on there whenever you search Orlando. If not, they said the next time they update the page, we'll all be back on it again.
Okay, and of course we'll also put direct links for all of our doctors and veterinary assistants and various guests on the show tonight in the show notes. So if you are looking for a vet in their area, those links will be available. And then, of course, we also have Chad, our executive producer, who, before we came on, was enjoying caramel cheesecake and making sure that it was on camera the entire time he was enjoying it to rub it in that he was enjoying caramel cheesecake without us. It was very disturbing.
Yeah, but he's in the cold, almost the coldest weather of all of us right at the moment. So
hey, that's payback. That's payback for getting the caramel cheesecake.
Hey, could have been better. It needed some Granny Smith apple slices on it. Could have been better.
Oh, there you go. All right, fair enough. And then
perfect for your herbivore diet, there, Chad.
And then we also have Christina Miller joining us from actually up in Canada. Finally, we have a Canadian guest. Jeez, besides myself. And let's see if we can get Christina on here. We can unmute the microphone for her.
In the meantime.
Yeah, in the meantime. Oh, there she is.
Can you hear me?
All right, Christina, welcome to the show. How are you?
Not too bad. It's great to be here amongst these very knowledgeable, fantastic people.
Awesome. Of course, you're talking about our guests, not us. It's okay, though.
You're right. Yeah,
now, Christina, you work here in Canada in the Nova Scotia area, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I'm at Companion Animal Hospital in Dartmouth. I'm pretty new to the Maritime provinces. I relocated here from Montreal, Quebec a few months ago, where I've been a vet tech for about going on a decade, and just prior to moving, I was interim curator of herps and fish at Zoo Eco Museum in Montreal. So a lot of experience with herps.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Very cool. All right. So, Jimmy, you want to talk about what we're doing tonight on tonight's show, or do we just jump right in?
Actually, we can actually jump right in, but I wanted to mention something, too. Christina is now actually going to be writing for reptileapartment.com for us too as well. So be sure to check out some of these articles, because John and I have had the pleasure to read some of her work prior, and actually her first article should be out. When, John? When are you going to publish that one?
Tomorrow.
So her first article is going to be out tomorrow, so really looking forward to seeing that published on reptileapartment.com. Just wanted to add that little cue in. So we're basically going to take questions from our audience. So if our audience has any questions, you can actually post your questions on YouTube down in the comment section, or you can actually post it on our G Plus event page too as well, where you're watching it. And we'll get those questions up to our guests and have them answered to the best of your abilities. But this show, we actually don't have any pre-written questions for our guests. So we're going to make this one like kind of hanging out with the vets and make it more like a reptile living room, as Bradley actually explained to us
exactly
earlier tonight. So no pre-written questions. So we basically wanted to tackle this show, since you guys, all three of our guests, actually work with animals and see animals on a regular basis. We want to ask you, what are the most common ailments, illnesses that you guys see on a regular basis? And let's start with Dr. Bradley Waffa, and since he's right there, go ahead, Brett. What is the most common ailments, let's say, that you see on a regular basis?
Sure. I think it relates a lot to the species that we're talking about, but I think in almost every case when it comes to reptiles, and this is the point I really try to drive home to clients, is that in almost every case, whether it's a leopard gecko, a bearded dragon, a ball python, something rather common fare, or something highly unusual like a Candoia species, in almost every case I can attribute some degree of the illness I'm seeing to stress. I guess, this is sort of a cop-out answer. I'm not pointing to the most common disease per se, but I think in almost every case, husbandry or stress related to poor husbandry is some component in the symptoms that I'm presented with. And so I guess that would be my take-home point, is something to always keep in mind, is that these animals are they're not dog and cat domesticated, and so they have very specialized requirements.
And Dr. Bruce, what are some of the most common ailments that you would see in our reptile friends?
Well, again, husbandry is usually the backstory to most things, but a lot of it depends on the species. If you're talking about snakes, we see the majority of the snakes coming in with something on the front end more than the back end: upper respiratory infection, infectious stomatitis, nose rubs. About the only time you get to the backside of the snake on a regular basis is a prolapse, or you happen to get somebody who's got a snake that's egg bound, which nowadays I see a lot more lizard species egg bound than snake species egg bound. And of course, with the turtles and tortoises, it's never really changed. It's always just, here's the gap. Is the egg going to fit? Is the egg not going to fit?
Very cool.
Sounds about right.
And as far as Christina, what is your most common ailment that you've seen in reptile species?
Well, I have to say that there's probably a bias, as everyone working in animals tends to attract a certain kind of illness. We all see things tend to come in threes. We seem a little superstitious. For some reason, I seem to attract the metabolic bone disease cases. It's probably in my top 3 that I see. And of course, it's generally attributable to husbandry. With any health issue in herps, husbandry is so key, and people are either just misinformed to begin with, they have everything wrong, or they're somewhat well informed and they're just missing some minor husbandry tweaks to get things really perfect. So to me, it's metabolic bone disease and probably a heating device failure or errors as a close second.
Okay, fair enough. Now, Dr. Waffa, you were talking about when we were talking earlier about the responsibility of pet ownership and that kind of thing, as far as, and this is something that one of our other colleagues has brought up numerous times, it seems like we're under the impression of when a reptile is brought into the vet's office that everything's just going to magically be okay. And when it doesn't happen that way, it's always the vet's fault. It's never that, you know, I did something wrong with my husbandry, because you're the doctor, you should be able to fix my mistakes.
Right.
And I'm sure everyone on the panels encountered that. And I asked you pointedly, you know, how do you handle that situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's, you know, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, and I know I mentioned this the last time I was on the air as well. There's a challenge we run into, and I feel like I'm well qualified to talk about this because I'm active on these forums and I see it happen, and I understand it because I keep these snakes too, these reptiles. There is a tendency to, we see something going wrong, and the first thing we do is we call our friends, we call everybody we know who keeps these snakes, we get on the forum, we type the questions, you know, and we want feedback, and understandably, and we want free advice. And I don't think there's nothing inherently wrong with that. You know, people, they want to reach out to the people who know. The problem is that, you know, they get this advice, they get that advice, they try this, they try that. You know, 2 weeks go by. We've now nebulized the snake with, you know, some toxic irritant, and you know, we've soaked the snake to, you know, it's nearly drowned, and you know, the snake is on death's door, and finally they think, okay, you know, it's out of my hands. I've tried everything that everybody else has recommended. It's time to see the vet. And the danger, I think, in that notion is that by the time I get a chance to see it, the snake is so far gone. There's little I can do, and you know, at that point, then the client leaves unhappy, the animal's dead, and you know that person is going to take to the forums. They're going to talk about, well, you know, I finally went and saw the vet, and as usual, the vet can't do anything, the vet's horrible, and they still charge me $60 for the exam, and my snake's dead. Like, you know, and it's an unfortunate situation that veterinarians run into. And, you know, I certainly appreciate, especially when you have 100 animals in your, you know, your snake room, the last thing you want to do is, you know, worry about taking each one of those in and the finances that could be involved. But we run into sort of the other side of the financial issue too, I think, when, you know, you have an animal that may be worth hundreds of dollars, or that has the breeding potential to be worth hundreds of dollars, or maybe an animal that's worth $0 that you've had in your family for 2 generations, and it's special and important to you, and you know, we never gave the vets a fair chance, and I guess that's a frustrating point for me. But I guess to get to the heart of your question about, you know, is it something we run into? Yeah, it's unfortunately something that happens a lot of the time. For
sure. And I know Dr. Bruce doesn't pull any punches when it comes to telling people like it is, shall we say, because I've seen a couple of posts where on Facebook where he's, you know, actually mentioned, you know, not by name, mind you, not by name. He's just mentioned, you know, okay, a client came in today and brought me, you know, species X and wanted, you know, XYZ to happen, and when I explained to them that XYZ just is not reasonable, and then the client just completely goes into a tirade. Dr. Bruce, how do you deal with people that basically come at you in an offensive manner? I mean, it's just, some of the stuff I've seen you post just really floors me that people would react like that with the truth.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I've been cussed out in exam rooms. Yeah, it's kind of odd. We were having a discussion this morning at my place, because literally before I got my first appointment even into a room, we had boom, 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 3 emergencies walk through the door. And of course, none of the animals were up to date on vaccines. And there's places in town that flat out won't see an animal that's not up to date on vaccines. And I'm like talking to my other colleagues, and I'm like, I don't even understand. If this emergency walked into their place and they were like, we're not seeing it, it's not vaccinated, I mean, at what point in time does the DPR not step in and say, you know, you still got to take care of these animals at some point in time there? But, you know, the hardest thing to really get separated in the reptile, what I consider industry, is that it's divided. There are a whole lot of people that have reptiles as pets. And those people, I feel, will take the time to do the research, take the time to really get bonded with that animal. And they come in a lot of times, and they're a little bit more willing to do a lot of the work and stuff. Then you've got the animal industry side, which is, guys that have giant warehouses with, thousands and thousands of animals. And no offense to all of you people, you help keep the industry going. But let's face it, how many times does a vet look at your animals? What are you doing whenever they get sick? Somewhere in the back of your head, you're smarter than the vet, and this is what you're going to do. So, there's your punches. But, I find that I have a better time with the clients that own a small number, or maybe one or two or one reptile, than some of my people that have tons. And if there's a kid in the room and it's really the kid's reptile and the parent is bringing him in because you've got to have somebody over 18 signing all the paperwork and everything, when you can sit down with the kid and really talk to him and say, okay, this guy, he's really cool, and I know that's why you got him, but I need to make sure. I need you to get this and look at it. I need you to go here and do this. Those guys will do it so much faster than some of these adults that will come in that immediately walk through the room with already a chip on their shoulder because, like Brad had said, they've already gone around and around and around, and just that mere fact that you told them it's $50 to walk through the door and be seen, they're like literally already putting their head up against the wall like they're defeated. And it's like, think of it this way. That reptile didn't choose you. That snake, that bearded dragon, that tortoise didn't jump up and down at the pet shop or the fire show or whatever and say, you're the one I want to go home with. It's the owner that purchased the animal, and ultimately it's the owner who's responsible for the care of that animal that, yes, has a beating heart. There, I'm off my soapbox now.
It's a good soapbox, though.
No, it's a great soapbox, though. I've written about it numerous times with the disposable pet nation, and
I want to touch on that too. Really, early on in my collection, when I had a small amount of animals, not as large as I have now, but when I had a small amount of animals, I didn't take them all to a vet all the time. If I saw ailments, I'd take them. Now that I actually have a larger collection and I don't spend as much individual time with each individual animal, I find myself that it's a lot easier to go to the vet, bring in 10 or 15 animals and say, can you do an annual checkup with these 10? And then next month come back with another 10. Can you do an annual checkup? Let me get a fecal float done. And, I don't know, I'm not going to talk for every veterinarian, but if you have somebody that has a large collection like that, I mean, typically when I go to the vet, it's $35 or $50 for the vet visit, and then it's a certain amount for each checkup. So if you take 10 or 15 with you for one visit, and they schedule it out where they have enough time to see them all, I mean, typically it doesn't cost that much more than if you were taking one at a time.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So I find myself wanting to do more annual visits with the vet and just get the fecal float done, get the annual checkup done, and then I'm good. And then, of course, the vet's, all technology savvy, so I get the reminder email every September, hey, you need to bring in LTC 00917, so it makes my life, because they're like, oh, you're ready for your annual checkup, you need to bring it in. So, and it keeps me, working with a larger collection. So I think anybody with, even 20 or 50 animals, and that's, a modest collection, should start looking at, forming relationships with vets, local vets, and bring everything in for an annual checkup. I know I've been promoting that for a little bit more over a year. Christina, what's your thoughts on that, on an annual checkup for reptiles? Should we be promoting that and trying to get the reptile community to actually think of it as, like a dog or a cat that goes in for their annual shots and stuff like that? Is that something that we typically should be promoting more and more of?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that as we have more value as for our herp companions, and they're in a lot of cases they're family members or their breeding stock, which is they're both are inherently valuable for various reasons. And not to sound like a broken record, but to mirror what the other vets have said, we tend to see people go way further compared to our dog and cat pets with home treatments, and things are just way too far gone. So having these preventive visits where we can address husbandry issues early and before they become health problems is key. I've tried to push for our clients who are coming in for things like bearded dragon nail trims, or they're calling because their snake has diarrhea, to come in for that first visit so that we can do a GPE, we can address things early, and we can spot early husbandry errors before they evolve into complicated health issues, because as we know, a lot of health issues develop very slowly in reptiles, and maybe that gives people a lack of appreciation for how serious things can become. Again, especially compared to our more sociable mammal pets like dogs and cats, where although you have varying degrees of them hiding their illnesses, we're still a lot more in tune to our mammal pets than we are to our herps in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Christina entirely, and I would echo her point and mention too that veterinarians are becoming a little bit more adaptive as well. It can be difficult sometimes in practices, I think, that are very well established and that have, sort of a set way of doing things. I know our practice has talked about getting a little bit more progressive with regard to reptile house calls, at least for local people that have large collections. I'm not that long out of school, but it's really interesting to me because, we all get the whole veterinary education. We get large animals, we get small animals, we get exotic animals, less exotic animals, of course, but we are trained in preventive medicine, and we're trained in how to do farm calls and how to look at the environment and how to think about sort of herd health. And the truth of the matter is, and USARC has really emphasized this point for years, a lot of what we do, especially with large-scale breeders, it's non-conventional agriculture is what it amounts to. We're keeping systems of animals, and it's always sort of frustrated me that veterinarians are so well trained in these areas, but then when we try to apply them to a non-farm situation, we suddenly get confused. Like, I don't know, I'm not there yet. And it's like we are. I'm very big on preventive medicine, and I think with reptiles especially, since a lot of times we don't get to see the signs of disease until they're very far along. Which, by the way, I think is another reason that vets often get animals that we can't fix, because they're on death's door by the time they're even showing symptoms. So I like the idea of vets being able to do house calls and come to your house and see the collection and take a few spot temperatures and look at the husbandry, rather than relying on the client's memory of this one animal that they may or may not recall that well, since they're keeping 100 of them. I would like to see more of that happen in the future, and I think there are more vets that are doing that.
Wow, that's something new. I would have never even thought about that, but that does make a really good point about, like you said, being able to go see the entire collection, maybe take a few spot temperatures, you'd be able to actually see read the humidity for yourself. You'd actually be on site and literally hands-on with everything as you would be in a farm situation.
Exactly. Collect poop from several different cages and batch it and do a group fecal sample and see, is there something moving its way through the collection? Are there, am I seeing signs or symptoms I should be worried about? Do I see something that's just egregiously wrong, either for the species or the location? I've seen some clients, I've seen some friends even that have, I visit their snake room and they have it perfectly set up, and I look at their thermostat and I see, they've got a radiant heat panel and it's reading 100% because they're sitting right under an AC unit. And I see the animal on the opposite side of the cage because it doesn't want to sit under a thermostat and under a heat panel that's blasting at 100. The temperatures are reading correctly, but these are subtle details. You would never, ever hope to see that in an exam room. And these are things that I think we can catch earlier if we have a closer, more personal relationship with our clients. But this is not something that's happening overnight. This is something that takes time to build in terms of infrastructure. Like I said, if you have an established hospital, this is not something... you have to make this cost-effective to be able to leave. You've got your driving time away from your other clients, gas, lots of other expenditures. So this is not necessarily a cheap, $60 exam visit. But if you consider that you're examining 100 animals and you have a serious client who's willing to pay for that, then there are ways to make it both reasonable for the client and profitable for you. I think that's one direction some veterinarians are going. And there are other ways too. There, like Jimmy mentioned, there's people that are bringing in groups of animals at a time and making it more cost effective. And it's just how do we apply, how do we sort of break the traditional mold and find a way to make the business run smoothly, but also help our clients that are keeping animals in a way that's a little bit inconsistent with sort of the traditional dog and cat mold. It's a challenge, but I think things are changing for the better too.
For sure.
Right. Hey, you brought up a really good point with the thermostat, being right under the air conditioning unit or whatever it was.
Sure.
Do you think people are relying too much on technology these days? Instead of basic animal care. I mean, I grew up back in the, raising animals back in the late 70s, 80s. We didn't have the lights they have these days. We didn't have thermostats. We didn't have any of that. We had incandescent bulbs and pine shavings. But we watched our diets. We watched our animals. We took them out. We worked with them, and we could see signs of distress or sickness. And there weren't a lot of vets back then working with reptiles either. I mean, are people working? I see on the Facebook groups, people are saying, "Oh, you got the wrong kind of light. You need this particular light, this particular thermostat." Are people just relying on that too much and not really paying attention to their animals? You think, or?
I'd love to hear Dr. Bruce's opinion on that because I'm sure he was seeing some of those clients as I was just starting to keep snakes for myself. But his tenure in this is a lot longer than mine. But I've read a lot of the older books and a lot of the older literature. I have to admit I've never really thought about it in that way, but It wouldn't surprise me, Chad. I mean, honestly, I think there is a lot of great technology, and I know I rely very heavily on my thermostats, but there is, you will learn a lot more from your animals if you learn to watch them and listen to them and observe their behavior closely.
I never heard of MBD until in the late 90s or mid 90s, and I mean, I grew up with iguanas and lizards and all sorts of different lizards, and never had a problem with incandescent light bulb.
Sure. And I've been pretty deeply entrenched in the green-free python world for the last probably year and a half, and it's always amazing because some of these animals can be so sensitive to changes, and I see some people that are just dogmatic about the way they have their system set up and not deviating from this, and they've got a system that works perfectly, and I respect that. I mean, all the power to you when you invest what some of these people do in these animals, to make sure that it's working efficiently and they're not losing things. You lose one snake that's worth over a few $1,000s, and it makes you very leery about changing things. You get kind of very set in your ways. Trust me, I get it. I've been there. But that said, you think back 20, 30 years. I mean, there were Trooper Walsh was breeding some of these animals. I mean, he paved the way for a lot of us. But there were importers that were breeding these animals. Were bringing them in gravid, breeding them in trash cans. With the plexiglass and an incandescent light. So. There's something to be said too for just being able to read the animals and identify their needs and what they're missing. And you're right. There's an art to that sort of transcends technology.
But also, not to interject too much, but I think we also underestimate how just how stoic and how tough these animals are, and that there's certainly a difference between just surviving in captivity and having a shorter lifespan and actually thriving in captivity and having a good quality of life and having a companion animal or productive breeding animal longer term. I think that people like to reference throwbacks to earlier herpetoculture, but what were our lifespans? And maybe we weren't seeing these health issues because we weren't screening for them, because they just weren't as well known by the veterinary community or by the herp community. So I think that a lot of people kind of use, well, he's surviving and he's eating or they're breeding as an excuse for husbandry errors. But I mean, reproductive success is not always a proxy for good health, and certainly with very delicate species, yes, you have to have fantastic husbandry to get them to breed. But I mean, your leopard geckos, your corn snakes, your bearded dragons, all of our borderline domestic animals, you can kind of mirror it to puppy mills, honestly. And again, reproductive success is not a proxy for good health.
No, Christina's absolutely right, and I'll offer a really interesting example of that. You know, it's, if nothing else, a good conversation sparker. But
Awesome.
Mark Mitchell gave a talk at the North American Veterinary Conference this year in January, and he referenced some really cutting-edge literature where they were looking at basically some biochemical and physiochemical parameters, looking at changes in leopard geckos, for example, when exposed to UV light. Now, we've said for years that leopard geckos are a nocturnal species. They don't bask directly in the sunlight. They don't need UVB. And as evidence, as Christina pointed out, as evidence, you know, they thrive in captivity. They breed. They grow to these robust sizes. They come in lots of different colors. They must be healthy. They must be happy. But there's a remarkable amount of UVB that is actually transmitted by the moon. And these animals have been shown biologically to respond to this light. So there's something, even if we don't have a good way of seeing it, we don't have a good way of measuring it, there's something that they've evolved to do. You know, there's a mechanism in place, and we don't fully understand it. But to Dr. Mitchell's point, you know, if we keep these animals, and to Dr. Bruce's point earlier, you know, we have a responsibility to these animals in captivity. If there's a chance that they're missing something, if there's a chance that we can enrich their lives and make it better by providing these things, then we should absolutely be doing it, and I agree with that.
You know, and I do agree with you both as well. That's one of the major contentions I have, is when you see a poor husbandry practice or something like that, and you know, not being a vet myself, obviously, but bringing it up to other people in the community, that's one of the major excuses is, well, it's eating and it's breeding, so obviously it's happy, and it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And now, Dr. Bruce, rather, just brought up a really interesting point, that UV bounces off the moon at night.
Yeah.
I had never heard that. Now, I
hadn't either.
I know that leopard gecko species are thought of as nocturnal, but I think in the Ron Tremper, Philippe de Beaujolais book, they actually changed that to say that, no, guys, actually leopard geckos are crepuscular, not nocturnal.
Sure.
But they're in that, what we call the magic hour in photography, I guess, where it's between sunset and, you know, it's right at sunset or right at sun up.
I call it the hour when I can't manage to take a good picture, but yeah.
Just to add to that, a few years back I saw a note on a study. I can't remember for the life of me who was doing it or where it was done. It was somewhere in the southern states. So to Canadian, that could be anywhere, sadly.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were looking at Coleonyx geckos, which are also eublepharidie, like leopard geckos. Right. And they were looking at their crepuscular basking habits and demonstrating that, yes, they are absorbing UVB light to produce endogenous vitamin D3, whereas we know that, yes, they can satisfy their dietary requirements for vitamin D3 because we see that they grow without skeletal deformities in captivity. But it just gives you something to think about, that are we, like we've just said, that is there something missing from our captive care if it's something that they're relying on in the wild.
Wow. Now, Dr. Bruce, could you add to that as far as the UV bouncing off the moon? I've never heard of that before. So I'm really intrigued if you might have any...
I kind of want to go outside with my solar meter and see what I can get from the moon now.
Yeah, exactly. No kidding.
Hey,
I want to do the same thing. I'm like,
the supermoon should have done it 2 days ago.
Well, I mean, you know, technically, how many veterinarians have not seen a leopard gecko with metabolic bone disease? And if we all fall under the same category, that metabolic bone disease is caused from improper UV absorption for your 125 dihydrocholocalciferol from the skin down to the stomach to absorb the calcium, then how does a nocturnal animal not become, you know, a sponge? So there has to be some way that they're absorbing some type of UV. And I have always told my leopard gecko owners, you need to get UV. You don't need to get giant UV. You need to get a Zoomed 2.0. You know, you don't need a 5.0. You don't need a 10.0. And for God's sakes, you don't need a spotlight on them. You'll cook them. But you know, if you take a minute and you look at the skin density of different levels of reptiles, you'll see that leopard gecko, you can see through him. You don't really have to do an X-ray. If he's got a pellet in his stomach, you can turn him on his back and see it. You know, you can show it to the owner. You see this dot moving around here? We've got to go in and get it. So that animal, if he was in the middle of bright, hot sun, his skin is going to get cooked. Now, on the other hand, you look at an iguana whose skin is thick as leather, and what's he doing all day long? He's sitting out in the sun. But both of them are going to have the same metabolic concept of, I've got to get a certain amount of UV to make this reaction start happening. Now, there's been some talk from some people that feel that this absorption of calcium in the stomach, this conversion and everything, is more temperature related than UV related. I know that Mark Mitchell at the North American Conference was talking about some studies, and he was literally quoting that at 89.8 degrees body temperature is what an iguana converts that step 2 in the stomach. And I tell my clients, if your iguana isn't getting over 90 degrees, he's not digesting anything, because basically that's where that whole reaction is happening. So they're literally working out physiology on these reptiles at an amazing rate. But yeah, even your nocturnal animals, they're going to come out and, you know, I mean, let's face it, if you go outside at night, it's a little bit dark, but I mean, there is some light that you're seeing, and so these guys are going to come out in that dusky evening. They're going to absorb some. And again, they're going to absorb it, and then they're going to go forage and hunt and eat and consume the food, because they know they've charged, shall we say, their stomach up for absorption, and now let's go get some nutrients and get to work.
That's amazing. Wow. Now, Chad, did you have another question over there for us, or?
No, that was it. I just wanted to make sure you guys understand. I wasn't saying that, you know, you don't need that stuff. It's just, are you seeing people relying on their thermostats and their, you know, their gadgets too much and saying, well, everything's good, you know, but the numbers look good, and not looking at their actual animals, you know? That was kind of
Definitely.
I'm pretty interested in the whole UV thing, because it's a huge controversial thing for colubrids, and me being a colubrid breeder.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I'm just going to straight out ask your opinion. Does snakes, especially colubrids, need UV light? And would you recommend it? Dr. Waffa, what's your thoughts on that?
Hang on, let's back up. You breed colubrids?
a couple.
You know,
yeah, maybe one or two. I mean, I don't breed very many. Just a couple.
You know, I guess I can't say I have a definitive answer. You know, do they need it? I guess the operative word there is need. You know, do they need it to survive in captivity? Do they need it to breed? You know, to Christina's point, you know, maybe not. But do I think that they should have access to it as they would in the wild, so that I can offer the most enriching environment possible? Might a more enriching, happier environment lead to better fecundity and more reproductive success? I can't say, but, you know, maybe. You know, I can't say that I handle all of my reptiles every day, but I do try, especially in the summertime, especially if I've got some sunlight in the backyard. I love to take my animals out, you know, at least let them, you know, experience some sunshine from time to time. I also happen to have a lot of windows, a lot of natural light that comes in through my snake room. Now, a lot of those UV rays, I can't emphasize how much UV gets filtered by glass, and probably a little bit too also by the, you know, the plastic and the tubs, depending on the, you know, what the animals are in. I can't say exactly how much they're exposed to, but I like that the animals get at least some degree of a natural light cycle and some intermittent UV. It's a good question, and I don't have a solid answer to, but I think in the absence of a solid answer, I would err on the side of giving them, you know, what's more natural.
So for enriching their lives in captivity, if we can offer them more of a natural cycle with the UVB or UVA or UV, in your opinion, that enriches the life cycle of the animal in captivity? I mean, because we know they don't need it to specifically breed, reproduce,
right,
stuff like that. But what's funny is, what really gets me thinking on this is the light-colored colubrids, and one of the actual morphs that came out is the moonshine morph, which was collected up in North Carolina
during the Superman, right?
Yeah. So, but when you put it underneath UV lighting or natural lighting, it forms two lines. It's a very light-colored, solid snake, yellowish. But when you put it in natural light, it forms actually two melanistic lines down its back. They're faded, but they actually form. So, and I see it, we see it in wild species too, that we breed them in captivity 2 generations, and they're these bright colored tricolors. They're very clean, and of course we're selectively breeding for that. But also, we look at their wild counterparts, and do they form darker because they're trying to absorb more heat more quickly in the wild, so they can go underneath cover? Maybe they bask out. So, I mean, it's just one of those things. Is the natural light more enriching to their lifestyle? Dr. Bruce, what's your thoughts on that? Does it enrich, snakes in particular?
I definitely think that your job as the animal keeper is to mimic their natural environment. If it's a snake that's outside and it's a snake that would naturally sun in a tree or on a rock or something like that, there's not any reason for you not to be able to provide that same energy through a UV bulb to them. But with respect to your comment about the colors, you take the animal out of the wild where it no longer has to hide or develop camouflage or have a dark colored skin because it doesn't get as much light as another part of the country, and so it needs to absorb the heat and absorb the UV for natural activities and such. So you take that animal out of that and you put it into a safe house environment as captivity, and then it's going to show you all those beautiful white colors that it's been trying to hide, because if it was out in the wild and it was an albino ball python, it'd be dead. If it was a bright yellow or orange snake, it wouldn't be able to hide as much. Some hawk would come by and get it. So I think your color situation is basically these animals learning that they're protected, that they're in a safe area, and they're no longer worried because they're not hunting anymore. They're no longer searching out food. They just wait for that lid to open up, and in comes the mouse or the lizard or whatever it is. So I think that basically we're getting these colors because the animals don't have any reason to hide them anymore.
Interesting.
I agree with Dr. Bruce, and I would sort of on his coattails, James. You brought up a great question, but I feel like you probably already know the answer to this. I mean, we have a great example, right, with the black milk snake.
Yep.
I mean, right?
Sure.
And you can correct me if you know any differently, but my understanding of its entire life history is that this is an animal that benefits when it's younger from the mimicry of being a tricolor, and then as it grows older and it has fewer and fewer predators, it benefits much more from being dark, turning completely solid black. It's a very highland species, high elevation snake that benefits from being able to absorb the heat and the rays of the sun more quickly. But maybe there's more to it than that. I mean, we've sort of assumed for years that the black is all heat, but maybe there's something to the UV. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that as an adult, full-grown reproductive female, she needs to absorb more calcium for egg laying and reproduction. I think there's still a lot more about these animals that we don't understand. But again, in the absence of knowledge, I would err on the side of providing a natural environment.
Right. And you know what's crazy? We can talk about the black milk snake, and we always thought it turned black to absorb more heat so it can hide because it's larger. It's not out there in the open. There's some tests that I've been running in breeding samples, and it's with females in particular. So the whole notion of males getting over 82 degrees kills sperm. Your fertility in many mountainous species lowers when springtime temperatures are higher. I was talking with some field herpers, and they were finding Central Plains milk snakes, and they were finding them in the springtime out basking in the sun. And the majority of the ones they were finding basking were females. So in breeding trials, and it's been very, this year was kind of an off year, but the past 2 years, I actually gave my females access to 88, almost 90 degree temperatures. in the tubs. And fertility rates, not this past year, but last year, were like 93%. The year before were 91%. This year was kind of an off year, but so I'm going to keep track on changing those. Now, I think it has to do with the females, reproductive organs. They need that extra heat. They want to digest that extra amount of food, and that extra heat in the springtime helps them ovulate and become breedable. And it was just really interesting how, out of 15 or 20 animals that they found, 10 to 12 of them would be females that were out in the open. All the males would be undercover. So I think it's kind of interesting, even with sexes, we can find particulars within sexes of certain species on, one thrives and has a better enrichment in life, at this point in time throughout the year. So, it's no longer we keep everything at 80 degrees, we just do, photo periods and everything breeds and we cool them in the wintertime. So I've been changing a lot of stuff around and keeping track of it. So we can see, maybe it is a possibility.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder if that behavior in your diurnal female colubrids is something that they've adapted to in response to greater calcium needs while they are reproducing. We know that calcium is necessary for vitellogenesis, so for yolk production, and also just fetus production or embryo production. So I wonder if this is an adaptive behavior that the snakes who are basking more are more likely to survive reproduction or to reproduce better, more efficiently. So then that behavioral adaptation is passed on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point, Christina. And I was actually talking with somebody about that with gray-banded king snakes, because gray-banded king snakes are notoriously, when they hatch out as babies, they're notorious to have kinks, small kinks, not able to cut through the egg. And being in West Texas, I haven't ever been out there, but looking at pictures, nighttime pictures, there's not very many nights that is very clouded over. There's a lot of moon shots out in West Texas, so I'm wondering if it's the lack of UV on gray-banded kings with the females prior to breeding in the spring as to why most of the babies that we hatch in captivity have kinks, are smaller than normal, there's runts, or dead in the egg, and they never get to hatch. So that's something I think I'm going to try next spring, because we do know Ronald Merker actually had a paper that he produced that providing the female with more calcium in the springtime, that he had stronger babies in the fall when they hatched. Instead of having a large amount of fully formed embryos in the egg, he was able to hatch more. So it was just something that, kind of piques my interest on the whole UV side for snakes.
Yeah, I think it would be a great, although expensive, experiment to take a bunch of clutch mates and raise half of them with UV, half of them without, and see what happens through their whole lives with regards to reproductive success and growth rates and longevity.
All right.
On the UVs.
Hey, Brad, you do the UVs, I'll do the regular ones. I'll send you the babies. You just take care of them.
I was gonna say, I think we should do this experiment. You just send me all your gray bands, and I'll take care of the rest.
All right, we'll do it that way.
So we have a question here from. It looks like the name is Picasso Gila Monster, which that's an awesome username, by the way.
Some of these parents love him.
Exactly. It says, I'm always looking for better husbandry for my heliderms. I have a Herritum and a Gila Monster that are taken monthly to outreach events and displayed for general public. The Gila is now 8 years old and the beaded is 2. Wow. What would your recommendations be for the display cage? Looking at it, looks like the question was cut off. Chad, is there more to the question, or am I missing part of it?
No, you're missing part of it. Chad, post it up in chat for us, if you could. And I think I know who that's from.
And while Chad is doing that, I do have... Oh, he's already got it. Okay. Okay, so here we go again. I'm always looking for better husbandry for my heliderms. Have a Herritum and a Gila Monster. We got that part. The Gila is now... recommendations for the display cage, looking at it from the animal's perspective. I'm currently using vision cages with normal lighting from the room's light. What would be the animal-friendly display allowing for public's view of them? That's a really excellent question, actually.
Dr. Bruce, you... Oh, go ahead. Dr. Bruce, you want to take a stab at that one?
You know, I'll take a stab. I was going to throw it to Brad, but, you know, basically all the standards, you know, you got to set it up with your same type of, you know, ground set and everything. I'm more of a tank guy than a vision cage guy. I've kept the majority of my animals in aquariums. And then, you know, you get some background for the, you know, for a couple of the sides just to keep them from freaking out, where it's just pretty much vision from the front. But, you know, definitely your whole thing with some of those cages, of course, is going to be, do you want a display cage that has a front sliding glass on it if you've got a Gila monster in it? You know, it depends on who you're going to be really showing it to. But, yeah, I would probably have to flip that to somebody who's used more of the different company products that are out there. I'm an old tank guy. Unless it's chameleon.
I have to say, I think visions are ugly. I don't use a lot of them, but there's something to be said for they're durable. They last forever. They do an excellent job holding humidity and heat, and I think for a lot of the desert reptiles, especially the desert lizards, they seem to work really well. With my Gila personally, I've only recently, actually, it's you know, we talk about practicing what we preach. I've only recently switched over to UV light on that guy. You know, this is also a species that's supposed to be primarily nocturnal, but they are seen, you know, diurnal too, and they do bask occasionally during the day. You know, so kind of on a hunch. I don't know any zoos specifically that are doing it. I have a lot of friends that work in zoos and institutions. Actually, Christina probably has interacted with some of these guys a bit too. You know, and I've heard various things about whether or not they actually need UV, and again, need being an operative word. You know, another idea that I have, and I have to admit, in my experience, most heliderms, especially as adults, they seem to be pretty tolerant of people, for better or for worse. I mean, to the degree where we free handle them on the internet and probably shouldn't, because they're very predictable and they seem just very docile and easygoing. You know, but again, keeping in the back of our minds that reptiles do stress easily, and especially if we're displaying to a lot of people and we want to limit their stress. One idea that I've had recently for some arboreal snakes has been, and this was actually demonstrated very nicely on a Facebook forum that I saw. I can't remember who did it, or I'd credit them. You go to Home Depot, there is a sticky, kind of a sticker that you can put on glass. It's made for homes to create kind of a privacy screen, and it's sort of a one-way tint where it allows people to see in or see out very easily, but not for others to see in. And I've been thinking about upgrading a lot of my arboreal caging, some of these highly, you know, delicate green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, candoya, animals that stress very easily, to create an environment where they can't see me walking around on the outside of their cage, but where they would feel protected and safe and secure in their own little environment. And you know, if you had an animal like a heliderm that you were planning to display to hundreds or thousands of people, that might not be a bad idea. You know, again, I'm not speaking entirely from experience, but just as an idea, it might be something worth trying. But Gilas need an enriched environment. Mine love to dig, and you know, as much as I enjoy setting up the tank and changing it around for them to make it beautiful and interesting, I think they have just as much. They take just as much pleasure in destroying it and undigging everything I plant and dumping things over. They like to burrow. They like to dig under water bowls. I think changing the substrate on a regular basis to make it constantly enriching, feeding them a variety of different foods. You know, as a veterinarian, I get in the habit of feeding dogs and cats a pre-formulated diet. You know, that's specially made so that they can eat the same thing day in and day out, and that is made for them. You know, it's veterinary nutritionists have spent years designing something that is exactly everything that a dog needs to eat with every meal. And I think it's a dangerous precedent when we try to take that same logic and apply it to an insectivore or an herbivore, or, you know, carnivores are a little different. We get away with a little bit more with snakes, but these are animals that eat a pretty varied diet. And the wild. Although they're carnivorous, they eat a diet of eggs. They probably eat insects opportunistically. They eat, mice. They're nest raiders. They probably eat carrion. I think they need probably a little bit more than we sometimes appreciate. And, so the environment is certainly one thing to focus on, but, the whole husbandry, the whole system is something to think about, too.
Just to add to Dr. Waffa's comment about the privacy screen, I haven't had any personal experience with Gila dermatidae, but I find with a lot of these kind of nocturnal, large, heavy-bodied anguimorphin lizards, kind of doing the rock stack against the side of the cage with a privacy screen is a fantastic way to be able to see the animal, but the animal has some privacy, especially if you have your heat lamp over a pretty tall stack of rocks. So I'm talking about you can make it as pretty or as kind of ugly as you want if you want to use slate tiles from the hardware store with PVC pipe, or make it a little more naturalistic and just put the effort into epoxying it into place, since these guys do love to destroy everything, and you don't want a smushed Gila monster on display, of course. But I find that combination of those kind of stacked, layered rocks with a heat lamp on top gives them that privacy and the ability to thermoregulate in privacy. And then with your kind of screen, your tint on the glass, you can still have really good visibility of this animal that's generally pretty secretive.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We do that with the Mountain Kings in our enclosures with tiles and wood spacers, because they squeeze in the small rocks crevices. Zonata species, Lampropeltis zonata, they're very tight into the tight squeeze in the crevices of rocks. So we utilize that in the colubrid world too as well.
Yeah, and it satisfies their thigmotactic needs to kind of feel nice and squished so that they feel secure.
And Uromastic species are the same way. You can think of them like a chuckwalla. They will crawl into very small crevices which you never thought they would be able to fit the fat little body in, and good luck trying to get them out again.
Yeah, and you can flip a coin on which one's mouth you can open easier too.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you say Uromastics?
Yes, sir.
John? Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, let me throw it out to the panel, because we've been talking about enrichment overall. And I'm sure we've all read about, some of the older textbooks, or not really textbooks, but the older books on herpetology and herpetoculture, where people like Clobber and things of that nature were talking about how rattlesnakes were able to recognize their keepers. And he seemed, at least for me anyway, kind of the forefather of the enrichment, of starting to enrich the reptiles environment. Are we finding, or have zoos actually published any documentations to say, hey, when we actually enrich the environment, where we give them basically things to do so they don't get bored, really, if for lack of a better terminology, do they actually live longer? Has anyone looked into that at all?
There's a lot of research in this area right now, and actually Lee Clayton, who's a fantastic veterinarian, has spoken about this pretty extensively at some of the North American veterinary conferences. There's a whole growing body of literature that's looking at sort of responses not only to enrichment but to different forms and styles of keeping. There's been a lot of actually training of reptiles too, especially in institutional settings, for things like blood samples or coming to take a treat. And then undergo an examination or something like that. And I think those types of things are, I can't say, and Bruce, you can, maybe you've seen something different, but I can't say I've seen a lot of that really trickle down into keepers yet. I don't know anybody that's really doing that, but I think that there's a growing body of data that we could certainly extrapolate from that would make our collections a lot more enriching.
Because I know, personally, from the speaking about the Uromastics again, there seems to be quite a growing number of people that are actually using cat toys. There's one
the wheel?
Yeah, the spinning wheel.
I've seen the spinning wheel. That's pretty cool.
There's several Uromastics in one specific collection that she has introduced this wheel to various Uromastics enclosures, and they all go towards it and, will actually crawl on it and, for lack of a better terminology, seem to enjoy using it.
Yeah.
and they've never seen this before in their life. I mean, it's, you know. And Dr. Bruce, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's cool. I guess I'm gonna have to get on YouTube to find this. But what I would assume is that they're a captive animal that wants to be a wild animal, and inside that small enclosure, the only way they could possibly really get a good run would be on a wheel. So I'm wondering how many of them are in the wheel because it's a toy, like a kid on a swing, and how many of them are in the wheel because they're wanting to stretch their legs. They're wanting to go for a little bit of a walk, you know, get out and move around a little bit. I would suspect more than likely that they're in this. You know, it's going to be a while for them to figure it out. But once they see that they can go for a while, that they're in it more because they're looking for something to do. And yeah, so definitely enrichment would go. I mean, I did see a cool video of a hedgehog playing with a little ball. That was really cool. But I'm going to have to go look for the Uromastyx and the wheel one now.
We see a lot of tortoises. A lot of tortoises playing with balls.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of YouTube videos lately of tortoises just playing with balls. Of course, you know, mounting them as well. But I mean, more than likely, I mean, most of them just seem to play with the ball. I think it wasn't too long ago. A dog came. A tortoise was playing with the ball, and a dog came to steal the ball, and the tortoise ran after the dog and actually bit the dog, and then went back to the ball.
And it went back to, I saw that too. Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah, so we
actually chased it away from its own toy. That was bizarre.
It seems to me that I see more of those videos in groups of animals that display more of a social hierarchy in the wild. You know, we don't see as many of that stuff with snakes, but certainly animals that are already used to interacting with each other, or that are used to having a companion or other animals to interact with, I think they do better either kept naturally in groups or in highly enriched environments where they have something else to do, something else to think about. I can say from some personal experience, I've seen a Uromastyx that would swim up against the glass and scratch so much that it literally was rubbing toes raw. And I know in one case we were able to basically get the animal completely placated just by adding a large coral rock that had lots of nooks and crannies, and the animal is so much happier in that environment just because it has places to hide, it has places to go and explore. And to Dr. Bruce's point, in captivity in a small enclosure, you know, a young Uromastyx is used to scuttling back and forth between hiding places and searching for food, and you know, if it doesn't have that opportunity in captivity, it's going to be bored, and it's going to look for an outlet just like any other animal would. And you know, although a wheel is an unconventional outlet, if it you know, provides that animal what it's missing, then you know, we've done right by that animal.
And you have to wonder too if we've seen in mammals, certainly like humans, and more recently in dogs, that exercise is tied to endorphin release. And although we need to be careful about what we extrapolate to herps, it may not be too far-fetched to say that it could be conditioned that they kind of like to run. They may have discovered the wheel by accident, but they may certainly be enjoying it if they repeatedly go back to it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I don't think it's too far of an extrapolation at all.
And Dr. Waffa, it's interesting you mentioned putting the coral rock on the inside the tank for the Uromastyx to climb on. That's one of the biggest ones. Not being a vet, obviously, but working with Uromastyx for a number of years, one of the most common ailments for Uromastyx is spine injuries from, like you said, being on the front of the glass, trying to climb and get out. And one of the recommendations that I've always made is put that rock terrace around the entire perimeter, and that, generally speaking, will automatically dissipate that behavior, because then they feel like they can climb up on something and see whatever it is that they wanted to see for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think they seem to like more of a height than we give them credit for. We don't think of them as a climbing species, but to your point, you know, we give them more of a surface, and they seem to move around a lot. Now, you know, John, as somebody who has kept Uromastyx before, I'd love your opinion on this too, because this is something I've run into. You know, there is this very popular notion that Uromastyx, especially, you know, particular species like Ornata, they get all of their fluids from the fresh vegetables and things that they eat, and that they don't need access to fresh water. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, because in my opinion, even though they don't drink from the water bowl that often, I've seen too many animals that I think are just chronically dehydrated and that really do benefit from at least having access to a water source. And
that kind of goes back to the thing of what Chad had brought up about, are we depending too much on the gadgets? Sure. I think technically, yes, you can keep uromastics with water, and you should. You should give all animals access to water, fresh water, all the time, 24/7, 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm. I disagree with that.
However, what happens is the uromastics, and people don't tend to watch them as much as they should. Mm-hmm. So a uromastic's walking through the water bowl constantly because of a non-enriched environment will succumb to tail rot or whatever because they're not being allowed to dry out.
Sure.
As they would in the wild.
Yeah.
So and that just comes back to, sorry to interrupt, but that just comes back to a multifaceted problem with the husbandry again. You have an animal who's in an enclosure that may not be very functional. So you have environmental stress escape behaviors, you have pacing, stereotypical behaviors which are, predisposing them to these problems that are true artifacts of captivity. And then by withholding water, you would potentially be predisposing them to other artifactual health problems in captivity, such as predisposing them to gastric sand impactions, because if they're dehydrated, they're not going to be passing that stuff as easily. So you can kind of argue for both sides, I guess, in the case of uromastics particularly, but there are some kind of deep-rooted husbandry issues on either side, and you really just have to have a functional environment that we like to try to mimic the wild, but we also need to omit the dangers. Mm-hmm. So, uromastics that are subjected to drought in the wild are probably having health problems from it too. Reptiles tolerate drought and dehydration much more effectively than mammals, but you got to wonder, are these guys living as long in the wild as they could in captivity under optimal conditions?
For sure. Hey, yeah. James, what were you going to say about that?
Yeah.
Well, the water issue. 24/7.
Well, okay.
Here,
True. 24/7's taking it a little bit far.
I mean, if you offer desert species like, I'll take rosy boas for example. Here in Florida, keeping rosy boas, I've tried. They survive, but they don't thrive.
No, they won't.
And,
you're right.
I mean, subocs too. So keeping them in the collection is pretty much having a fan to rotate the air, the dry air, and only offer water twice a week. So that it goes in one night, it gets pulled out the next morning, and offer it twice a week. So offering it on a regular basis, I say yes to. But some of the species that trying to keep them in optimum conditions in certain parts of the country may be hard. And I have a question for you too, John, on the uromastic side, though. Mm-hmm. Don't uromastics make nests or areas underneath the ground?
Yes, completely.
And let me just ask the vets on here, don't most reptiles absorb moisture through the skin?
I'll let Dr. Bruce can comment on that too, but I think not as much as we give them credit for.
Amphibians maybe, but I don't really get it on reptiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like using those humid microhabitats, if anything, is just reducing their evaporative water loss. So the water that they're losing just from respiration, and that they do have very selectively permeable skin, and water's not really going in. If they're soaking in a water dish, yeah, they can absorb through the cloacal tissue, through the buccal tissue in some cases, maybe. They drink through their butts. It's always a funny one. But they're certainly not absorbing it through their skin in the case of herps. And amphibians, yeah, they have a very, very permeable skin, and
right.
The skin can even be considered an osmoregulatory organ in amphibians because they rely on the water exchange so much through their skin. But in reptiles, definitely not. It's the humid microhabitats are, again, more to reduce that evaporative water loss.
And
I I'm gonna call you out a little bit here, only because I was called out so badly about this, and I've maintained the belief for years. But
Is it the cloacal thing?
yeah, can you find me a source?
No, it's one of those things that you just keep seeing in the litures, and you always
I
kind
know.
of wonder without the source.
I
Thank
know.
you for disagreeing on that one. I needed someone to disagree.
Well, so it's funny because when I was a fourth-year veterinary student, I worked with Doug Mader, who wrote Reptile Medicine and Surgery, and I went to his clinic, and he let me handle all the reptiles there, and I had an animal there. And then I wanted to soak. I thought it was dehydrated, and I thought soaking it would do well. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because they can absorb water through their skin." And he said, "Are you sure about that?" And I hit the literature. Reptiles, not as much. And I said, "Well, yeah, but there's the whole cloacal drinking thing." And he was like, "Oh, really?" He said, "Do you drink through your butt?" And I said, "No, I personally." He said, "We'll find a source." And it seems reasonable, right? I mean, we've all seen reptiles poop, and they produce that. You can see the cloacal membrane and rectal membranes there, and it seems reasonable that a mucosal surface should be capable of absorbing some degree of water. And so I hit the literature, and it was one of those things where I've heard it for years and years and years, and I searched and searched and searched, and I couldn't see anything. And so so two things happened at that point. I got home and frustrated. I started weighing my helas before and after long soaks. I found that more often than not, actually, they were losing water because usually they'd poop in the tub. And I spoke with him, and we emailed a little bit back and forth, and it seemed to be that I guess he put another student to that task, another extern at one point, and they found the same thing in turtles. Now this is, don't get me wrong, I absolutely believe in soaking. I think there are benefits to soaking, especially with animals that are just trying desperately to shed, and I think that it provides an excellent opportunity for an animal to drink, especially if it's an animal that's debilitated, might not otherwise make its way to the water bowl. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to say that I don't think there's value in soaking, but
we can put an end to that cloacal drinking tonight.
or unless you can find me a source, because I love the idea.
Exactly.
I've not been able to.
I'd always kind of been suspicious that maybe that was something that was taken from amphibian physiology and the drink patch and anorins, and that maybe someone had the idea that those were kind of related. But
I would love to find a source. It's a belief I held for years and years and years. It's but it's not something I've actually been able to scientifically corroborate.
Excellent.
Now, James, to your point about keeping rosy boas in Florida, that's one of the major points that I constantly bring up with people when they're keeping reptiles. Select the reptile that fits your environment. As in, when I used to live in California, I lived in East County, which is basically a desert. So veiled chameleons were the only chameleons that were going to survive. If I bought a first for Pardalis, I mean, my apartment alone, if I didn't run air conditioning, where I lived would get to 110 inside. Just ambient temperature with all the windows open during the summer. So unless I'm running coolers and chillers like I would on a saltwater tank, I'm very, very limited on the species that can survive those temperatures. So always select the species for your personal living environment.
I agree. I agree with you there, and maybe Brad and Dr. Bruce can touch on this too. I agree with you there to a certain extent, unless you're able to provide them the micro environment.
Right.
If I wanted to specifically keep rosy boas, now I was keeping rosy boas with the rest of my colubrids, same with subox. I was keeping them with the rest of my colubrids, same type setup, humidity 60%, and they would survive. But they wouldn't thrive. They weren't those bright-eyed rosy boas that you would see photographed, or even from other breeders. So I think, if I specifically wanted to keep rosy boas, I would definitely keep my room, humidity levels down. I would, set up the microenvironment. But I mean, if you're just looking to keep a snake species, we have enough snake species that'll fit every climate that we can.
Exactly.
What's your thoughts on that, Dr. Bruce? Do you think, as a purchaser or a pet owner, do you think we have the should we be more responsible on what species we keep related to, what environment that we actually live in?
Well, that would be great. But again, there's just so many people that grab on the oh wow factor. More people get the animal and then look into the geographic setup of it after the fact. But yeah, that would be great. I mean, down here in Florida, good grief, you can keep a subtropical animal without any issues. You can pretty much keep a lot of different stuff down here, but there's definitely things that you don't want to keep, unless if you want to have one of those setups where you're spending a lot of money on temperature and all. I've seen some guys. Chad Brown gave a talk to our Central Florida Herp Society a couple months ago, and he's talking about these enclosures that they made for some of these monitors, and it's he would say this is a tree-dwelling monitor, but we're not going to make a giant 10-foot enclosure. We're going to make an enclosure, but inside of it, we're going to set it up as though this animal is up in a tree. So it's going to be that middle of the tree where all the branches are coming out. But he's got animals that he's got in solid wood enclosures that have just the smallest little peephole, and then he's got his lighting in and everything. And I mean, it's almost like an isolation chamber. But he's got it in a room where he can monitor all those temperatures. Now, I think that's kind of really going to an extreme, but if you want to breed that species or own that species, I guess that's what you're going to have to do. But I would say that it's going to be much easier on the owner to pick the animal that meets their geographical area, and it's going to take that guy that's going to take that extra 5 minutes before he grabs that animal to think about it, to make the right choice.
Yeah.
John, if that's the case now, the only thing you get to keep is garter snakes and salamanders.
Oh, don't even get me started on the allowed list for Canada. Talk about a shock to the system. When you come from, California, where you can basically, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but you can buy a lion online, literally, and have it shipped directly to your door, to coming to, another country where you can't even own what in the States is a feeder cockroach. I mean, literally, it's that much different. It's really eye-opening experience for sure.
I feel like we don't have everything down, though. It's always been a mystery to me why we have so many baby sulcata tortoises popping up in, I guess, in Montreal. We went through a phase of that. I mean, Montreal has, we have almost winter and winter. Those are our two seasons. You have kind of hot summers for maybe 2 months of the year, but that's just not a way to keep a sulcata tortoise unless you can provide, an entire room for it, if not larger. And I think that, we have a lot of species that are prohibited. It's certainly kind of a pain if you're coming from somewhere like California, I guess, where you can get almost anything. But I mean, we still don't necessarily have ethical choices in what's available.
And if I'm not mistaken, Chad just posted a link that actually may answer that question about do reptiles.
I'm looking at it right now.
I know, me too. I'm trying to scan through it really fast to try to find out if reptiles drink through their butt.
There's a few areas that say they do it.
I'm control F-ing cloaca. We're looking for it. I'm seeing sections of it that talk about kind of the same thing that I was saying, which is that it seems reasonable. It's a mucous membrane. The uptake sites appear to be mucous membranes. The pharynx, cloaca, cloacal bursa. I think this is specifically talking about amphibians. I think Christina was right, that this is largely an extrapolation. But even here, it's an extrapolation from, well, it's a mucous membrane, and we absorb some degree of electrolytes through mucous membranes. I don't think that there's any, any demonstrative evidence that shows scientifically, I mean, here's proof that they actually absorb water in a meaningful way.
You could use the Sherman Fear test.
There you go.
Let me your test on a cloaca and then pre-soak and post-soak and see if your numbers change.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I like that.
Now, scrolling through this document, actually, for the panel, this is something I've just come across, and it's, of course, specifically to Uromastyx because I'm a Uromastyx guy.
I'll put it in the showcase, too, so it'll be up there in the showcase for you guys.
Yeah, we probably should show it to our audience, too, since we're all talking about it now. The salt glands. In iguanas, and Uromastyx also do the same things. So they they can't expel salts through their nasal passages. In reference to James's comment earlier about the Uromastyx being an underground egg-laying species, or just being an underground species, I'm wondering if the salt glands go the other way, if that's how the Uromastyx are absorbing water, is because we can all agree, I believe, that under the earth is obviously going to have more moisture in it. Whether you're in a desert or not, doesn't matter. It's still going to have moisture. Is it even plausible to think that way, that maybe that the Uromastyx are absorbing moisture or humid air through their nose and through their mouth cavities, possibly?
I think
that's how they're getting the water.
I think it goes back to Christina's point, in that it's not so much about absorption as much as it is about evaporative loss. Right. In other words, if you're in a dry environment, those mucous membranes are going to dry out faster because you're constantly losing moisture.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The salt gland itself operates differently. It's almost like a kidney in some animals, in that it helps to regulate electrolytes. It's not really an absorptive.
Gotcha.
The salt, I know some people, they used to give salt tablets to construction workers and football players and stuff. What about salt retaining the water? They're using the salt balance to retain water in a drier environment, and then when water's available, they expel the salt they don't need.
Wow, that's a really good question, Jeff.
Dr. Bruce may be able to jump in here, but that's my understanding is that's exactly what the salt gland is doing. Is that water tends to follow salt and or electrolytes, and basically what we're doing with the salt gland is when we're seeing that salt accumulation accumulation on the nose of the Uromastyx or chuckwallows or whatever species we're talking about. That's basically what's happening, is that by removing that from the body, we're allowing I'm going to get all confused here. Basically, that we're maintaining an osmotic balance so that we maintain adequate fluid pressure and we're not losing water in that way.
Right. Okay.
I used to eat those salt tabs every day.
It's just like Gatorade.
Yep, that's pretty much what it was. Talk about Gatorade. Let's talk about Gatorade.
Okay.
Let's talk about
And
Gatorade.
Pedialyte.
Gatorade and Pedialyte with reptiles.
Yeah. Yep.
Yay or nay?
Not
It's in an article too.
10%.
What's that, Dr. Bruce?
If you don't use it pure. You can use Pedialyte. You can use Gatorade if you're looking to potentially help rehydrate a dehydrated animal, but you absolutely can't use it 100%, or you're going to cause an osmotic gradient. It's going to make the animal even more dehydrated. It's the same reason that you don't feed an animal that's dehydrated. So I tell my clients, if you want to use it, it's 10% tops, and we're not going to discuss it any further. It's you dilute it down to 10%, so you're still getting your fluids, you're getting a little bit of electrolytes in there, but you're not causing such a huge osmotic gradient that's going to pull all of the fluids from the subcutaneous tissue now back into the GI tract and increase the overall dehydration.
While we're on that topic, what about probiotics and stuff? Have you ever used those, or are they beneficial or anything?
I use a let's call it a natural probiotic. I have healthy animals in my hospital, and if I see animals come in and I do a fecal and it looks like their protozoa level, bacterial level is really low, and they're not doing well and they're not digesting well, I'll get a fecal sample from one of my healthy animals, I'll mix it with some water, and we'll give it to them with a syringe, and we'll rehydrate or recolonize that animal with similar base protozoas that species would require, and I find that works tremendously better than some of the pre and probiotics, especially whenever you get a lot of people that think yogurt is a probiotic for everything, and it's really not.
Who's asking?
Now,
So-
Dr. Bruce, what is your have you ever encountered reptile keepers that use the Benevac which is that supposed I think it's supposed to be a probiotic for some exotic mammals and rabbits and things like that. Have you run into that?
I've had people use Benebac. I thought there was a discussion on an ARAV page about that, and somebody had said that they made a Benebac for reptiles now, but then I think somebody else said that it depended on if it was a carnivorous reptile or a herbivorous reptile, whether or not it was going to work.
Yeah.
I basically kind of tell my clients, you know, all of your pre and probiotics are going to work to a certain point, but they're not going to, and I just smile, I said they're not going to work as well as mine because mine's a natural product. But yeah, there's plenty of people that use them, and I certainly wouldn't tell them they're not going to help. I will tell them sometimes that the help is maybe limited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we've seen the reptile avian one, at least back when I was in Montreal, and you always kind of wonder, it's kind of a lazy catch-all to say that, yeah, all birds who have really huge, diverse diets and all these reptiles who have diverse diets and ecological niches are all going to be fine with this one probiotic. And I wonder about the quality control in a lot of probiotics as well. It's a problem on the human side where what's in the capsule or powder is not always what's on the label, so you have that to add too.
Or even alive.
Exactly, and I completely agree with Dr. Bruce. That's really low risk, and it may help if there's something else that they're not willing to pay for. Probiotics probably aren't going to hurt, but that fecal inoculation idea, it's something that you kind of see in the literature, and if it's working great for you, that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's basically it's sort of a spin-off of the fact that the herpetoculture has gotten to be such a sterile field that you get these eggs and you're putting them in these incubators and you're raising these babies on grates and stuff, and in reality a lot of your lizard species, as soon as they are born, they run around and they're picking up little things off the ground which are actually fecal balls, and they're sort of culturing their own intestinal tract right off the bat. But there's a lot of people that have bearded dragons and some high-end, lizards, and what will happen is these eggs are going to hatch, and the babies are not going to have any adults around them to run around and pick up those fecal samples. And it doesn't happen all the time, but I promise you, if you get some juveniles that just basically are poor doers, husbandry is correct, feeding is correct, you're actively seeing them go over and eat, but we're getting tiny little poops or no poops, weight gain isn't there, you do a fecal on them and you see that they don't have parasites holding them back, the first thing I always tell my client is, let's get a new culture in there, and let's come back in 30 days and re-see where their weight is. And the vast majority of them, that simple thing really gets them rolling again.
And James, you have a product over there, don't you?
Yeah.
You were going to highlight
actually,
it for us?
this is what I actually use. It's Nutribroc DM or DF, and it's a reptile and amphibian probiotic. And I actually use it, and I was skeptical on using it, but with colubrids, I do have a few females in the springtime that have a tendency to regurge their first meal back. So of course I'm wanting to breed them, and a regurge will just set you back. So I actually had a few babies that I brought out. They regurged coming out of brumation, out of cooling, and they were quite thin. So I wait my normal 10, 14 days, refeed them, dust them with the Nutribroc, and it just, I can't say 100% that it was what changed the feeding habits, but I've noticed
Something
that
happened.
it does seem to help out, and especially with my females. I dust all my females, not so much my males because I don't feed them very large meals right off, but all my snakes when they come out, I dust it all with the probiotic. First thing out of the spring, first 4 or 5 meals, just to get all those enzymes working and everything going. And I haven't had a problem since I've been doing it.
James, do you feed frozen thawed out of curiosity? Yeah. I've always wondered, and again, this is one of those things where it's just kind of a thought experiment, and I have no real data, but it's just another one of those things that kind of threw out there as sort of a talking point for the community. I've always kind of wondered when we see some of that, if some of those natural gut flora are actually inoculated by the prey species that they eat live, and if we lose some of that natural bacteria in the process of freezing these animals, I don't know.
Wow.
Like I said, it's just a thought, and I have no data for it, but I don't know.
But I think we do have data for it, don't we?
What?
Just experience, you mean?
Just experience. I mean, looking at, and granted it's two different elements, but I'm saying, like, we know pretty much that when we freeze food, any food, it loses some of the nutritional value of it. Is that, or depending on how it's frozen, I guess would be the better way to put that?
Well, and certain nutrients, I think, is a better way to put it.
Or certain nutrients, right.
Sure. Some are more stable than others, and certainly with regard to bacteria, I think bacteria and certainly parasites, certainly those things are killed by freezing. But I don't know. Dr. Bruce, I'm sure, has encountered this, but I know some people that are so adamant, and it's funny that James worked as my example, but like so adamant, they're like, you know what, Doc, I don't know if it works. I don't know what you've read, but like I've tried it and it works, and I'm not going to argue with what works. And at some point, I just have to step back and say, okay, I respect that.
And that's the thing. I mean, somebody told me I had a hatchling. I bought it in a few. I'm going back probably 6 or 7 years ago. I bought it. Got it here, 10 days, fed it, regurged, waited 10 days. I mean, it was like on the verge of death, and it was a baby hatchling, and the only thing it could eat was a pinky head. I mean, it was a small North American milk, and somebody had mentioned it, and actually I think it was a forum post by Kathy Love had mentioned it, and so I bought it. It was like $8 for the bottle, so I bought it, I tried it, the baby survived. And then, over the course of time, I just continue to use it. And, is it absolutely necessary, or does it actually help? I don't know. I mean, I don't have the whole, chemistry basis of it. But it's something that I use. And it's more, I don't see any harm in it either.
Yeah, I think when it comes to these supplements and food additives and all these little kind of diet accessories, if you want to call them, because they're pretty pervasive in all of veterinary medicine and even on the human side. I mean, there are so many supplements out there that there's no, there's really no statistically significant evidence that some of these things work, but placebo effect is very powerful, and so can be placebo by proxy when we're working with our animals. So just as conjecture, I think what we could do is you should culture that probiotic bottle to see what's actually living in it, and then look at your non-medicinal ingredients and do a double-blind study and see if your animals are responding just as well to your non-medicinal carrier in your probiotic compared to the ones who are on the probiotic, if there's anything even growing in it, or if what's growing in it could potentially be useful if they're actually gut bacteria. And I mean, like, these things could, I have so many ideas, but everything costs money, right? But whenever we come to these over-the-counter remedies, and I mean, again, like what Dr. Waffa and Dr. Bruce were saying, if someone really adamantly says, well, it's worked for me, I don't want to change it, okay, but I mean, anecdotal evidence is the weakest kind of tier of evidence that you have, and when your money could be better spent on things like fecals or better preventive medicine, you wonder if your money should really be spent on something that might just be superstition or placebo by proxy.
I guess it's time to break out that microscope again next spring.
Exactly.
All right, Bradley, you're going to have to help me out on this one, so when I do the fecals, I know what I'm looking for.
I'll see what I can do.
I'll just send you the poop.
I'm used to that. People always send shit my way.
Oh, man.
Actually, Christina, I think I'll just send it to Canada. It's a little bit cooler. It'll last a little longer that way. I don't know if we can import that stuff.
You can't even get cockroaches, right?
Exactly. Can't even send poop to the mail in Canada these days.
Yeah, but you guys can get bog turtles, though.
Sorry, which turtles?
Bog turtles?
Oh, yeah.
Those and indigo snakes, I believe you can get too, can't you?
Yeah, if you're rich.
Yeah.
If you're absolutely loaded, you can get indigos.
Yeah, exactly.
Same way down here in the States, too.
Yeah, just about.
So,
Man.
well, do we have anything else we want to touch on? Christina, is there anything you want to touch on just on overall basis? I think we've had a great 2 hours. I can't believe it's flown by so fast. But
I
is there
know.
anything...
I just looked up at the time and I was like, oh my God, really? Oops.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience or touch on, vet-wise?
I think we've had a pretty nice coverage of topics tonight. I'm done for the night, I think.
All right. I'm all geeked out. But Dr. Bruce, anything you want to have in closing comments?
So everybody go out there and buy something from everyone who sponsors this program.
That works.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Bruce.
That's an
That's
endorsement.
awesome. That's the best endorsement I've ever heard in my life.
All right, Dr. Waffa, you're last.
That's no pressure, right? You
No.
know,
How do you follow up with that one?
I know that's hard to beat. I guess.
Buy two.
You know, so I've had a thought. This has been, it's kind of been following me around lately. It followed me after Daytona. There were a lot of Daytona goers that kind of went with me, or didn't go with me, but that were there and that commented on the same thing. Mm-hmm. You know, I would have to say, one overarching thought, and it doesn't even touch on anything we've talked about tonight, but just something that's been with me lately is go out, you know, support the sponsors and support the people that are really doing something a little different too. You know, one thing that was disappointing for me at Daytona was that the show has shrunk, and it's shrunk in diversity. You know, I love ball pythons. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a ball python basher, but it was really pervasive monoculture. And I remember, for me growing up, part of the fun of these shows was just going out and seeing reptiles, seeing so much of what was out there, meeting so many different passionate people who were really experts in their one little area and always had something new to share and teach me. And it was disappointing not being able to get to see some of that. And as somebody who loves some of those really unusual species too, it's disappointing and frustrating, you know, pouring so much time and energy and money too into working on some of these animals and not having anybody care. You know, and I know this is a sharp deviation from anything else that we've talked about tonight, but I would say, you know, as we go out into the week and in the coming months, and especially as we kind of hit the winter doldrums and we're all thinking about, you know, kind of brumation and sleeping, like, hit the books and hit the reptile apartment articles, and, you know, let's read about and learn about some new species and some threatened species and some, you know, things that are different that people are just starting to pioneer and understand. I think that's I think that should be a goal for everybody.
You know, and one last thought to follow up on what Dr. Waffa is saying there. And the only reason I bring it up is because you did mention books, and this was an actual statement from a Facebook post in regards to ball pythons and morphs. We just wrote a review on Stephen Broghammer's latest book, on Python Regius, and someone was asking, you know, well, how do I learn about the morphs? And of course, you know, because I was given the book to review, I said, hey, you know, check out this book. It really is a really excellent book. And I'm like you. Ball pythons are great snakes. Don't have any reason to collect them. But, you know, I understand a lot of people do. And I said, you know, check out this book. The very next comment, within seconds of my comment, was, well, buying a book, you know, those are outdated before they're published. And I almost fell out of my chair and almost said, well, your computer's outdated when you bought it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Best comeback ever.
You know, well, I didn't say it because I was trying to keep my professionalism in the forum or whatever aspect that you want to keep that. But this is my show, so I can say that and get away with it. So, you know, and this has been brought up time and again. James and I have talked about it. Chad and I have talked about it. Yes, I still have old books that are probably older than I am on reptiles. And I get teased about it a lot. But you know what? There's valid information in there. And guess what? That's where it started. If you don't know where you started, you can't have a future.
Yeah, it's true.
So you got to pick up the books. There you
I
go.
love it.
Go
There you
find
go.
some of these.
Exactly.
1940s. Go find some of these and read these, and look at how far we've come in advancement in herpetoculture and herpetology too. I mean, I love reading anything pre-1970. I love it
Yeah.
because
All right,
it gives me the vision of where we started, in the studies and how far we've advanced
Okay,
to where we are now.
absolutely. I've got one for you too, and I swear I didn't plan this. It's just there was something I realized recently. I had them both sitting out. I got a chance to pick this one up recently. This is a 2-volume set. I'm sure Dr. Bruce will know this one. It's this is an awesome textbook. It was written in the early 80s, 1981, I believe. Awesome too.
Almost an antique.
Right?
Hey,
1981. This book is as current as ever. But here's what I'd really like to point out. James, I think you have this book. Have you seen this one?
Hang on, let me white box here real quick. I do have that one.
You do. Okay, here's what I love about this book. If you ever have a chance to pick this up, I've had this one since I was a kid. Okay, it's great for the young budding herpetologist. It talks all about setting up your first snake cage, selecting a snake for you, blah blah blah. It's a really easy read. But here's the best part. Okay, the chapters in this fantastic textbook on parasitology were written by the guy who wrote this book.
Exactly.
Right. So
this one.
there's another classic. But what I love about this example is that here you have academia. You have just these world-renowned herpetologists, veterinarians, academics who've written these books, and yet they are also active right there in the trenches with us. They are keeping, they are breeding, they are sharing their joy and their passion with everybody else, and that is the intersection. That's what I love about what I get to do as a veterinarian, because I get to ride that fence, But that's what I would love to see more people do is help bring that all together.
Exactly.
What do you got there, Chad?
Snakes and Lizards by Coburn. Back from, I had this one. What is this year? 87.
I gotta get through my Dr. Fry books. That 2-volume set.
Yeah, those are heavy reads. They're good, but they're heavy.
Well, I'm halfway through the first one. It's only taken me 4 months to get halfway through. But I've read bits and pieces of all of them. So, but I want to get through those because I want the new ones.
Yeah, for sure. Well, once again, thank you to all of our incredible guests, Dr. Waffa, Dr. Bruce, Christina. Such a pleasure, and what a learning experience. So now we can definitely confirm that reptiles do not drink from their butt. If we take nothing else from this conversation, reptiles do not drink through their butt.
It's really a take-home point
Read that
tonight.
whole article first, John.
And if anybody's watching this and has the paper where
Please.
reptiles drink from their butt,
Absolutely.
please post it.
Forward it to us, please.
And
Absolutely.
the news article about the fraternity guys that died drinking wine out of their butts does not count. It does not count.
Well,
Better than an article, video.
Exactly. We want video. Totally.
Well, I'm going to extend your guys' invite into November after the veterinarian conference here in Orlando. So I would love to have Dr. Bruce, Dr. Waffa, Christina, have you guys all back on after that conference so we can talk about maybe some new stuff that you guys learned while you were there.
That would be awesome. Definitely.
I'd be honored. Thank you.
So figure first either the last week, Thursday in October, first Thursday in November. Would that be possible for you, Dr. Bruce? If not,
I can check the schedule. I think it most likely is. Yeah.
We'd love to have you guys come back on and kind of make this Ask the Vet a little bit more regular here on Reptile Living Room. I think it helps out. We've had very good feedback from having you guys on.
Awesome.
Very definitely.
Great.
All right. So in that closing, we will see you next week, Thursdays at 9 o'clock. Catch us on G+, YouTube, or follow us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Reptile Living Room. John, you got anything in closing, or Chad, you got anything in closing?
No, sir. I think that was probably one of our best shows yet, actually.
All right. Great to have everybody on, and we'll see the audience next week.
Thank you.